Okay, so then when we listen to the teachings, and for me also presenting the teachings, and we should all give rise to this altruistic, this selfless, our listening should be kind of selfless for the benefit of others. We're doing this. It's our bodhisattva practice of listening to the Dharma in order to be able to apply it in the best way or according to the best way that we can. So with that motivation, listen carefully so that you have something to remember. Of course, we have the text that you can use, and hopefully at least these teachings inspire you to read the text. And if you can remember or take notes or read it along with the teachings in the future, in your short future, then that would be very wonderful. Although it could be for some people the teachings, Buddhist teachings are very inspiring, but and certainly I'm sure during the time of Buddha Shakyamuni and since then the teachings have continued to inspire people now all over the world, but the continuance of the teachings have occurred through people actually putting the teachings into practice and having the teachings change their mind, transform their way of thinking, transform their emotional life, transform their limitations. And that is how the Dharma has actually been preserved or upheld from the time of Buddha until now. So we should strive to be one of those people who practices in order to have the Dharma blend and transform our ordinary mind. So it's the difference between being concerned with your own benefit compared with being concerned with benefiting all other beings. At this point in the text, we come to the 7th chapter. Of course, the entire teachings of Shantideva can be subsumed under the 3 phases of practice, which are to give rise to bodhicitta, which is taught in the 1st chapter. And that can be the point at which we transform our orientation into the path of the bodhisattva conduct. And then, of course, that shift in our orientation through the taking of the bodhisattva vow needs to be nurtured and cultivated daily from that time on. and the chapter on carefulness and vigilant introspection and patience, all the teachings of those three chapters, the fourth, fifth, and sixth chapters, are ways that initial bodhicitta is preserved. And now we come to the last three chapters, beginning with the chapter on diligence. And as we see from the outset, Shantideva's teachings are advice and explanations from that are synthesized from all the sutras into a very workable set of instructions on how to actually practice the conduct of the six paramitas, beginning with generosity as the way to develop or give rise to bodhicitta, and then the discipline of carefulness and mindfulness and introspection in order to preserve it, along with the third paramita of patience. And each one of the paramitas, the six paramitas, have a causal relationship, a cause and effect connection through the non-attachment to through giving with non-attachment, and we become more or we become free of possessiveness. Then that makes possible the practice of discipline. And so generosity then becomes the basis for discipline. And then discipline, through practicing discipline, which here is presented as carefulness, training in carefulness, training in mindfulness and introspection, as we've discussed, that practice of the bodhisattva discipline makes the ability to acquire patience. And then patience, particularly in regards to the difficulty, being patient in the face of difficulty with Dharma practice, with the bodhisattva practice, a difficulty in recognizing the kleshas when they arise, the difficulty of antidoting the kleshas, and the difficulty of creating strengthening or empowering our bodhicittas so that the kleshas don't reoccur. And this is the discipline of patience, is to persevere in that. And through that kind of patience, then diligence can be applied. And it's through diligence that enlightenment is attained. As Shantideva begins saying, thus with patience, I will strive with diligence. In other words, patience is the basis or the ground to develop diligence. For in such diligence enlightenment is found. So here he's saying that it's through diligence that an individual goes, or an individual transforms themselves from being an ordinary samsaric being into an enlightened being. If no wind blows, then nothing stirs, and neither is there merit without diligence. So we should this isn't just like a poetic phrases here, but we should think when the wind blows how that makes things move. And even in our inner body, when we breathe, there's a whole interdependent playing out of movement from one end to the other in our bodies. And we should think of that as being like what diligence is. Like nothing stirs, nothing becomes freshened. You know, the wind is a refreshing element in the world. Without the wind, then everything becomes stagnant and moldy. And so without diligence, then our practice similarly is can be threatened by that stagnation. And of course, merit here, neither is there merit without diligence. Here, what's referred to by merit here means the two accumulations, kind of the wholesome power of merit and wisdom, the two accumulations. So then, as to what diligence is, he goes on to say in the second verse, diligence means joy in virtuous ways. So joy has to do then with a state of mind. It's a mind that delights in virtue. So it really has to do with a mental disposition. And it refers to virtue. It excludes, we could say diligence excludes being enthusiastic about negative actions. We don't say that you're diligent in negative. Diligent means joy in virtue, or delighting in engaging in virtuous actions. And even though those actions may be verbal and or physical, diligence refers to the mind practice of joyfulness. And not only does it exclude unwholesome actions, but it also excludes indifference. So it has this sort of courageous enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, I'm not so fond of that term. But diligence has to do with connecting your mind's joy with action that's virtuous. And of course, the reverse of that is called laziness as one. Like, what is it that prevents diligence? Let's put it that way. What is it that obstructs or prevents us from this joyful endeavoring in virtue? One is laziness, the second is, or here, its contraries have been defined as laziness, an inclination for unwholesomeness, means being kind of drawn towards what's unwholesome, negative actions, how easy it is to react or to participate in a situation in a negative way. And the third reverse of the third, what's contradictory to diligence is defeatism and self-contempt, as he says. So self-contempt, or what do we call it? Self-deprecation, self-deprecation, that term. So these are the three states of mind that prevent diligence. And the chapter, the teachings, Shantideva's teachings, are how to remove these conditions that are contrary to diligence. In other words, these three kinds of, aspects of laziness, is drawn towards unwholesomeness and self-denigration or defeatism. So he takes each one of these three and teaches on them. That's what makes up the chapter, are the teachings on these three conditions that are contrary to diligence. And secondly, the other section of the chapter are how to implement favorable conditions for diligence. And so we'll take these, of course, verse by verse. The first are removing what is contrary to diligence. And then in the third verse, he outlines that by identifying laziness, which by definition, laziness would mean no joy in virtue. So there's three kinds of laziness. One is a taste for idle pleasure and a craving for repose and sleep, and no qualms about the sorrows of samsara. So these are the three causes of laziness, or three kinds of laziness. Laziness itself, just to clarify here, laziness is a cause of a lack of diligence. It's contrary to diligence. And laziness has three forms. Being drawn towards entertainment without any interest in virtue, indulging in basically just preferring to sleep, preferring to just zone out and just sit around. That kind of laziness, which might be considered what we think maybe conventionally, that's a lazy person. But here, the first kind of laziness is being interested or being overly, having a yearning for diversion, yearning for entertainment, needing to be entertained, always looking to be entertained and seeking one or another's form of pleasure. And then the third form of laziness is not being sad about the condition of the world, not just the earth, but the world of rebirth, the world of samsara, the wheel of samsara, not being affected by that. So laziness indeed is born from these three. So we although we engage in these forms of laziness and sort of appreciate or take pleasure in the suspension of the sort of ordinary or gross conceptual gross thoughts, because underneath that are still churning all the thoughts and afflictions, creating karma. And so when our pleasures come to an end, which they do just on the basis of impermanence and causes and conditions, then we're left with having accumulated suffering. Seems like we were experiencing some kind of relief in that suspension of our kind of gross preoccupations and so forth, but because there was a clinging there, and that there is there's an undercurrent of karma that's being produced that will cause our future unhappiness and suffering. So at the end of the day, then there's suffering. So this is not the kind of this is not taking a break in order to gather your strength to continue in bodhisattva conduct. This is a kind of an addiction or a yearning for idle pleasure and sleep and not thinking about samsara, not being aware or not caring about samsara. No qualms, no qualms. Sadness, as many teachers, Rinpoches talk about, and Trungpa Rinpoche talks about, to really be an authentic practitioner, particularly in the Mahayana and as the ground for Vajrayana, then we really need to discover what he called the heart of sadness. And it's with that heart of sadness, that kind of brokenheartedness, that we actually engage in the practice in an authentic way and become a genuine practitioner that has the results that the Dharma talks about, the mind transformation. And also these three, taste for pleasure, or craving, yearning for pleasure, and sleep, and not being sad about samsara. We within that context, within the context of that laziness, we enthusiastically become involved in pursuits of worldly pursuits, working to be praised, working to avoid being blamed, praise, blame, gain, loss, the 8 worldly winds, pleasure, pain, notoriety, obscurity. We're always working to gain one and avoid the other, and then life goes on, and without any end. There's no end to the 8 world, where nothing is ever accomplished. And somehow we never get weary, and even are proud of our worldly activities and boast about how much we do. But from a bodhisattva path, then this kind of laziness, which, as we see, laziness means being too busy. They're very busy. Too busy to practice, too busy thinking of something to practice, too busy talking, too busy doing. That's a form of laziness. Okay, so then how to rid ourselves of these 3 forms of laziness. Now, first he takes the first teaching here is what does he say? Taste for idle pleasures, yearning for idleness, snared by the these the next 3 verses here. This first of the 3 verses here, Shantideva is presenting a way of contemplating using imagery. And he's saying here, he's talking about when we're lazy. Of course, the overall way to rid ourselves of laziness is, and they're talking about this yearning for idle pleasure, is impermanence, contemplating impermanence. Through the contemplation of impermanence, then our laziness is antidoted and diligence arises. Since diligence and laziness are incompatible, they can't occur simultaneously. It's the law of contradiction. So then to give rise to diligence, then we reduce and eliminate laziness. And laziness, particularly this form of laziness of idle, yearning for idle pleasure, is antidoted by, first here is by using the image of a fisher, or this is by a trapper, like a fisherman, and a net, a fisherman, or like a net. He says, snared by the trapper of defiled emotion, enmeshed and taken in the toils of birth, again you've strayed into the maw of death. What is it? Have you still not understood? So, of course, Shantideva, we can say Shantideva is counseling himself, but we are not just eavesdropping on Shantideva's self-reflection, but we are taking what he's saying as something to apply ourselves. And so we should, from time to time, in contemplating impermanence, bring to mind what it is like, what it is like when a fisher person, a fisherman, when the fishing industry, let's say, catches fish by using a net, and thinking of the fishing industry, I don't know, and the net as being the afflictive emotions, attachment, aversion, indifference, pride, jealousy, envy, all of that. Think of that as represented by, or as that a fisherman and a fishing net are a metaphor for that, and just visualize what that's like for the fish, of course. And how it's through the kleshas enmesh us in this cycle of samsara. We can swim around and so forth, but we're always surrounded by this net. And this is how we live our lives in this net of birth and death. We never are outside of that. 24/7, we're always in the process of dying. Death is certain. And so thinking in that way, and thinking of this image of a trapper and a net, or a fisher in a net, I think of these two boats. The way they catch fish, to have two boats that are with a net between them, miles across, very big, and it's going all day, just holding everything in front of it, and it's this huge industrial sized net. And then at the end of a time, then that net just comes together and gets pulled up out of the water and dumped onto the ship and ground up into whatever. But that's the image of the kleshas doing that to us. And so we should understand that. How can we ignore that fact? So it's very to kind of give an image to that is very helpful contemplation, not just repeating words to yourself, but also calling up some image like that. Okay. Okay, so how can we ignore this is the point here. What is it? Have you still not understood? He says, how can we ignore that fact? So we need to drive that fact home, both by contemplating in a verbal fashion, auto-suggestion, and imagery. So the point is face up to it and practice virtue. Accept. Then, the second image is here is a buffalo. Here it's a buffalo beside its butcher. He says, "Don't you see how one by one death has come for all your kind? And yet you slumber on so soundly like a buffalo beside its butcher." Of course, if you've been to India or Asia, this calls immediately up. But you see it exactly that way. You know, there's a whole section of a bazaar with dozens of butchers all together. They all bunch up, and one after the other, and every one of them has a goat. I always remember the goats on a rope right next to the little 8x8 little booth or tent or whatever they have, and the goat is there, and the previous goat is all laid out on the table. And you see water buffaloes laying there just sleeping. So he's saying here basically, don't be like that. Don't you see how one by one all your friends, think of all your friends that have died. Some have been younger than you, some have been older than you, some have been the same age as you. You used to have, I don't know who you all are, but you used to have great-grandparents. Then you had grandparents. Maybe you don't have your grandparents. Maybe now your parents are dead. Your uncles and aunts are dead. They're older than you. And there you are. And then there's ones younger than you. And we can read and hear, and all the people who are every day we can fortify the fact that in spite of however people died, they all died at all kinds of ages. Young babies died, children died, teenagers died, adolescents, 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds. All death comes for everyone. No one escapes. Death has come for all your kind. And yet you slumber so soundly. So if we see that and appreciate that, but then don't plug that into our actions, then we're like the buffalo sleeping with a rope around its nose next to the butcher, just waiting our turn. So don't be like that, he's saying. Do virtue. If we understand the significance of death, then to not practice virtue empowered by that understanding is what here is saying is amounts to stupidity. Like a buffalo. Then 6. The third image here is the image of like thieves and murderers or kidnappers. All the paths of flight are blocked. The Lord of Death now has you in his sights. How can you take such pleasure in your food, and how can you delight to rest and sleep? Which is what this first. Actually, it's up to from the 4th to the 14th verse are all about that first point of antidoting the yearning for pleasure, idle pleasure. So here, I think of there's these, like often you see in the films, movies, like action movies, how they're trying to kidnap or assassinate somebody, and then there's people who pose, they put on phony police uniforms, and they get somebody that you want to assassinate is in a car, and maybe a chauffeur, or maybe they're driving, and then the police, they put the barricades up on the different streets, and then they put, they direct them, turn over here, and it's not according to the plan, but they have to do it anyway because it's the police and this, and then they come to the end, and then they're shot or whatever. So it's like this, all paths are blocked. The Lord of Death now has you in his sight. The only road open is the road to your death. That's what the image here is of. And the assassin, the robber, always is watching and waiting for you. He already, like if it's a assassin, then they have you in their sights, like a sniper. They're just waiting. All they need is just a little piece of your head or arm, and then they can eliminate you. So how can we be happy and idle with just endless pleasures? Our days and our nights are speeding by, and so we must persevere in virtue. In Asia, in Tibet, sometimes if you're in a bus or I've been in a bus or sometimes in a car, and then the thieves will put rocks out on the road, so you have to stop, and then they'll just wait there all day. They'll just wait and drink tea or beer or something, and then you have to stop, and then they come out, and then they take everything you have. So that's like they say, Lord of Death has you in its sights, meaning death. So this third image is being ambushed. So you should try to use that in your contemplation of impermanence and impermanence. And of course, for we humans who are cognitive of our own birth, then we should also then we know that death is imminent, and we need to use our time left, however much there is, in wholesome, intentional action. Of course, this is the Bodhisattva path. So always the underlying virtue is bodhicitta. Even if you are just sitting and you don't have anything to do, and you decide to practice bodhicitta, practice developing bodhicitta through various teachings on how to practice bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta, love and compassion, meditate on the four immeasurables, and so on and so forth. These, if you need to know these, so that you know how to replace thinking of how to divert yourself, how to enjoy yourself when you could be practicing bodhicitta. And then if you also then have the opportunity to interact with others with that bodhicitta, then how much the better. But we need to be looking for ways to practice virtue with bodhicitta motivation. Then the next few verses are again reflections on particularly here, is on the three contemplations of impermanence that hopefully that you may already be familiar with. One, that death is certain, that the time of death is uncertain, and that when you do die, you die absolutely alone. And so first in verse 7, it's about he's contemplating, he's suggesting or giving a way of reflecting on the certainty of death. Death will swoop on you so swiftly. In other words, it's going to happen soon. Even if we live long, it's still short. It's still, we will still say it's too soon. It's too soon, no matter how long we live. And we may even die tonight. So death will swoop on us so swiftly. So gather merit till that moment comes. So use the moment. What is it? Seize the moment to practice the two accumulations, conceptual merit and non-conceptual wisdom. Even if you then throw off your indolence, what will you do when there is no more time? Okay, so at death, which can come instantly, if at that time we suddenly realize, and now we wish, or now we want to practice virtue, then unfortunately there's no time. So even if you then throw off your indolence, I mean, even at the time of death, if you suddenly stop, you suddenly throw off your laziness, but there's no more time, even if we feel inclined to virtue. So at that time, then there's no point to it. We need to act now and not wait till we don't put off practicing virtue. It will fill us with, especially for less for those who think of themselves as Buddhists or Dharma practitioners. One of the great sufferings of death is regret. Even they asked Milarepa why he went off into complete isolation and practice. What could have been the impetus for such a radical way of practicing? And he said, I just didn't want to feel regret when I died. So that. Then the next 8th verse has to do with that's the 7th verse is to ascertain, and there's many, of course, methods of training the mind in the certainty of death, as under the category of contemplating impermanence. But here we'll just mention how Shantideva is presenting it here. That's kind of a advice. Of course, there's many ways of approaching that particular conclusion that death is certain. One is that no one ever escaped death. There's no instance in human history of anyone actually escaping death. And death is certain regardless of who you are, how much power you have, how much influence you have, how much wealth you have. That won't matter. You can't put it off. Even great saints, even Buddha Shakyamuni is taught, even Buddha Shakyamuni, since he was born from a womb, then death was certain. And that was actually Buddha, that was his last and final teaching, was the impermanence of his own physical death. So these are other also ways to contemplate the certainty, to gain certainty as to one's own, what do we say, mortality. Then eighth is mentions the, as certain as we are of death, we can still think that it's going to happen later, that there's a certain time that's appropriate. Well, my time for dying is not happening right now. And here he's saying, this I have not done, and this I'm only starting, and this I'm only halfway through. Then is the sudden coming of the Lord of Death, and oh, the thought, alas, I'm finished. So we've all got plans, and we've got things to do, and novels to write, songs to sing, and songs to write, and and lots of things we're even thinking of, wondering if we should even start them. And some things are halfway done, and so on and so forth. But death comes unexpectedly. And then the thought comes, regret. And what gives rise to regret is the realization that now death is here and I haven't really practiced virtue. I've done lots of things that I thought were nice and kind and good, but now I'm questioning my motivation. Like what was my motivation and so forth. So we really have to, while we can, consolidate all that we understand as virtue. And apply it to our actions. That's why it says this, because it says diligence is a mental joy, a mental joy. It doesn't have anything to do with our actions, diligence. It's not about our actions, it's about the joy and the understanding of the power of virtue that's diligence. But that diligence is enacted through verbal and physical actions. So it can be said to be diligence, physical and verbal virtue can be said to be diligent, but only because of the diligence, the mental state, not because of the act. So given that time is uncertain and that we will have to leave our body at a certain point and go forth into the post-mortem state, whatever that may be, we want to make sure that when we look back and start to experience this death process of looking backward, at our life, that we will not feel remorse at a lost opportunity. Then verse 9 has to do with time of death is certain, the time of death is uncertain. Then there's still some holdout. There's still some lingering sort of karmic habit that needs to be antidoted by contemplating how profoundly alone we'll be at death. You'll look upon the faces of your hopeless friends, hopeless meaning that they've given up hope that you will pull through whatever it is that's killing you, that's your cause of your death. Their tear-stained cheeks, their red and swollen eyes, for such will be the depths of their distress. And then you'll see the heralds of the deadly Lord. So here, like all those people that are there with you, whoever they may be, that you can't take them, you can't take any of those who you are most attached to, your lovers, your children, your parents, your family, people, all your friends. No one can go with you, and none of your stuff. You can't take your water bottle. You can't take your smartphone. I almost said you can't take your transistor radio. You wouldn't even know what I was talking about, probably. I don't know where that came from. You can't take your transistor radio. So you can't take anything with you that you've kind of valued and grown to be sort of an extension of you, like a smartphone. It's almost a traveling companion that gives you permission to do things. It argues with you. It withholds information from you. It helps you. It informs you. It frustrates you. It's your smartphone is it's like a dream consort. So none of the, if you go alone, you can't take your family and friends, not one single, like Rinpoche said, you can't take one needle with you. And thirdly, even your body, the most cherished possession, your body, the thing that you for so many years even thought who you were. You thought you were this body. You looked in the mirror and you saw yourself. It gave you pleasure, it gave you pain. Even that body will be just a lump of meat that you will leave behind and not take with you. So what is it that doesn't die? You should ask yourself in this train of thought, this contemplation. What is it that seems to always be persistent? What is it that has what we call a continuity? And try to make a commitment in this contemplation, then to reveal or to make evident that continuity quality of your mind that never comes into existence and never ceases. Sometimes during the death process, it says that we have flashing memories of the past, maybe your past life that you're just ending, maybe strange previous lives that are kind of unhooked or unanchored and float into your perception at the process of dying. And sometimes you'll see brief glimpses of your people around you, or brief memory of your family and friends, and then they'll disappear. And sometimes you'll have fleeting foreknowledge of your experiences to come, your life to come. And sometimes you'll experience fleeting, or sometimes you'll experience karmic projections. Of various kinds. Here, that's what it says here. And then you'll see the heralds of the deadly Lord, meaning that's what refers to those kinds of experiences at the time of death. We can even, in our tradition, and of course there's a whole body of literature about the dying process and all the disintegration of the elements and the rising and falling of the different essence drops of life force and so forth and so on, and the bardo. But our experience of death will be unique to our own historical being in samsara. We can make certain categories, 6 realms, or the three realms of samsara, 6 realms of samsara. We can make these clumps of generalizations and clumps of experiences that people may have or beings may have, but when we die alone with our own unique experiences, our own unique karma. So contemplate that. We're not just going to fall into some chute and like a fun house where different things pre-programmed pop out at different times. And if we learn all those, we'll go through it sort of without screaming and yelling. So it's, I don't think that that's not the way karma works to my mind. So the memory, in verse 10, the memory of, okay, contemplate. So in verse 10 then goes on, Shantideva says, the memory of former sins will torture you. The screams and din of hell break on your ears. With very terror you will foul yourself. What will you do in such delirium? So the confusion that is experienced at death pervades everything we do, everything we say, everything we think. We won't be able to, we'll come to a point where we won't recognize others, and we won't recognize even ourselves. And we will be, I think the dominant feeling may be when you are dying, and I think what might be the most a universally shared experience is powerlessness. Suddenly, you have no willpower. You can't will something into your mind. You can't will something into being. And that can be very terrifying, enough that you may poop your pants. As it says here, foul yourself. That's what kind of a more polite way of saying that. We lose power even with our biological functions. So again, now we have willpower. We could say, Western bred philosophers think of the importance of free will. So we can throw that out if we want to say we have free will, within the confines of our karmic predispositions, we can decide on our actions, especially when we are driven by bodhicitta. That sort of opens up the scope of our free will. Even, like I said, even when there's nothing to do or say, we can still transform our mind with love and compassion and bodhicitta. That kind of virtue we need to get used to practicing now, while we have the freedom to do so, and hopefully the information on what to do. It doesn't really do to think that, bodhicitta is a wonderful training. Training in bodhicitta is so amazing. But then if you sit down, do we really know how to train in bodhicitta? So that way, if like a living fish, if like a living fish that twists and writhes, you are so terrified while still alive. So if all this kind of makes us like really uncomfortable and squirmy and kind of nervous as we're contemplating in this way, which is what we're kind of that's what we're suggesting to ourselves, we get to that point where we're very uncomfortable, not like a buffalo. If we're that terrified while still alive, then what need to speak of of pain unbearable and hells created by past evil deeds? So what happens when, without any power, all there is just the spontaneously arising results of our negative actions since beginningless time? We can't just be content or we can't just be satisfied with the fact that, yes, I have a precious human body, which my rudimentary level of karma would indicate that I have all these precious human qualities, I have freedoms and advantages. And that all came about through virtue that my mind enacted through whatever body or speech faculty I had in my history in samsara. That now that's all come to ripen, all that virtue has come to ripen in this life. But that's a very dangerous interpretation of both precious human birth and karma, because samsara, even though we can't even conceive of this, but in the sutras, and we talk about samsara is beginningless, since beginningless time, which is almost a contradiction. Time always has something to do with space between points, and time and space kind of coexist. So beginningless doesn't even fit into that system, that logic. So we can't assume, and we're even asked or told, don't think for a minute that things, because you have this human birth with all the freedoms and advantages you have, that now you are on some sort of an escalator that continually, lifetime after lifetime, will take you to the top, to the higher realms, for instance. That's not the case. It could be just like that turtle putting its head through the ring in the endless ocean, takes a breath and then goes back down again. So when we think of here, he says, created by past evil deeds, if we think in terms of samsara being beginningless and endless, then we've done a lot. Some lifetimes we only survived through negative actions, killing, stealing, deceiving, and so forth. That's all we did. So we should understand that the karma of that will come to pass. Karma is infallible. Causes must have a result. And so now we should practice virtue to become free, to mollify, to to de-intensify negative actions, the fruition of negative actions. Dharma, we say Dharma is the antidote to negative actions. Negative seeds must bear fruit commensurate with the cause, and in conformity with the cause. Harmful causes, harmed results. But through Dharma practice, we can alter how those negative actions mature in our experience. And so when here we are at this crossroads of having the freedoms and advantages, whatever virtue we can practice, whatever bodhicitta we can bring forth, then that will bring us out of this descent into suffering. So we'll become freed of rebirth in the lower realms. Like Dharma can free us from rebirth in the lower realms, it can escort us into the higher realms, and ultimately free us from samsara, or let's say free us from samsara, and ultimately bring us to perfect enlightenment. So all these stages of purification can happen if we know what virtue is, what its significance is, and practicing it, and not being, in this case, lazy by wanting to always being driven towards distractions and pleasures. How can you remain at ease like this when you have done the deeds that lead to contact on your tender baby flesh of boiling liquids in the hell of extreme heat. So it's completely unreasonable if we contemplate this anticipated situation. It's completely unreasonable to remain at ease in the face of that. Of course, this is the teachings of Shantideva, and drawn again, as I said, right from the sutras. I can't really, so it's kind of I'm kind of just mentioning it's kind of a diversion from that, but it could be that, I mean, there's some implication here or some expectation here that the listener would believe in karma, that the listener who's listening to this, particularly, I guess, would believe in past and future lives. I don't know if you thought of whether you're one of those or not, or whether you do believe in past and future lives or not. But I don't know where I'm going with that, but it just occurred to me that the weight of responsibility that Shantideva is assuming people will undertake here certainly depends on their worldview, particularly the existence or the truth of past and future lives. And of course, Buddha Shakyamuni. Of course, I'm not a scholar, or I don't know, everything that Buddha Shakyamuni taught by any means. But Buddha did not. Buddha never said that there was such a thing as past and future lives, nor did he say, and I'm saying this because of what he did say, or did he ever say that samsara actually exists. These are the experiences of delusion. The karma, even in the teachings on karma, it's taught that on the what we would say, I don't want to say ultimately, but actually, karma doesn't exist either. Those are all the entanglements that arise based on a dualistic mind. And a dualistic mind arises on the basis of self-clinging, or what could be called, what also is called ignorance, or what's also called a lack of recognition of your true nature. On the basis of that lack, there arises a feeling of a self, which actually has no counterpart in reality. It's a fleeting feeling. It's like we say the wind. We talked about first off the wind, that feeling of a self arising from the lack of recognition of our nature is like the wind blowing from that lack of, it's the wind of ignorance, giving rise to a feeling of I, which makes its first mistake by conceiving that there is other than I, duality. And that process continues with the support, a feeling of support from the other, a feeling of being undermined by the other, a feeling of being exposed by the other, that this ignorance being exposed. And then from that comes pushing and pulling, aversion, attachment, attraction and aversion, and then karma. And then karma meaning action, and action meaning reaction. And this action and reaction kind of is the superficial playing out of a core ignorance, which is a mere mistake. So all of that whole process of becoming, from a lack of recognizing our true nature all the way up to action and reaction and the creations, so to speak, of samsara and pain and pleasure, are all experienced are all the experience of a mind that is deluded, a mind who is ignorant of its own true nature. So in that sense, karma doesn't actually exist. Past and future lives don't actually exist, but they are the experience of the content. The ignorance becomes a continuity because mind itself and its absolute nature is a continuity. The luminous continuity of mind's nature, is experienced as the beginningless and endless wheel of samsara to the unenlightened mind. So we shouldn't discount the importance, I think the importance of believing and in the relative truth of past and future lives. It is a component of the path of freedom from delusion. Anyway, this is just my own kind of musing here. I didn't mean to digress to that point, but I always wondered how it is that, why would people be interested in Buddhism if they didn't believe in past and future lives? Why not just have a good time? I mean, diligence is, laziness seems very easy. Like, why bother? Why not? And what's the difference? It'd be, if you want to rob or steal or something, well, take a chance. No, I don't know. It seems like there's got to be more to it than just that you want to be a very, very good person. So, anyway, we'll go back to Shantideva, Agriminity. Okay, so testy and thin-skinned, you want results without endeavor. Okay, so now he's so if we think that way, I mean, we are very sensitive, kind of short-tempered, easily upset, and so many are the troubles now in store for you. So so here is again just kind of punctuating the importance of impermanence, understanding impermanence, and how if we really want to come to a realization of our true nature, then we have to put in we have to put in the work. We have to do that. We have to endeavor here. I mean, forget about uh, uh, the diligence of going without sleep and going without food in your practice as a practitioner, kind of in the Milarepa, that kind of diligence. I mean, just in an ordinary sense, we have trouble just concentrating on studying the Dharma, intentional studying of the Dharma, not just reading one book after another book after another book, Dharma book, but really studying it and seeing where your resistance is to it and how you can overcome that doubt, and then how you can blend that teaching, that Dharma, to your mind and the difficulty that it might be taking. Like, I'm going to have a hard time with this one, and really how to do that. Like those are what that is what diligence is for. And without that, then how can we hope for any results? Like, oh, I've always been a Buddhist, and like, how come I'm having such a hard time with this one or that one, this situation or that situation? We have to. I mean, Buddhism means studying, learning, studying, contemplating, and then meditating. Meditating means applying that to your mind, both in a quiet way and in an active way. So how much time do we spend studying? How much time do we spend in generation completion stage practices? Then wishing for the results is pointless. Though in the grip of death you're behaving like a god, in other words, uh, in samsara, here's the thing, okay, contemplate this way. In samsara, whatever is born must die. But we aren't thinking that way. We're thinking that we're going to live a long time, like gods. Gods have a long time. It's like a dog thinking it's going to live longer, as long as its master. Oh, maybe I'll get to be 80 years old. I'm just going to run around in circles and have fun and like that. You know, like for God, compared to human, it's like a fly compared to a human. Something like that. You can look in the words of my perfect teacher for all of the math. But anyway, it's like that. There's no time. And suffering, alas, will beat you down. Suffering at death and in our future lives will defeat the little bit of virtue we do in this life. Or if we don't practice virtue in this life, then all of the virtue that it took to bring about all of the freedoms and opportunities that you've had in this life, all of that will be for nothing. So we must remember that we will die, and in these ways, and strive in positive, virtuous actions. meaning actions, motive with a good-hearted motivation and a bodhicitta motivation. So take advantage of this human boat. So this boat, this means this body, this physical body. Take advantage of your mind of finding its renting, or having a cancelable lease on this body. Our mind has sort of occupied this body, so take advantage of it. It's like a boat. This boat can take you over from samsara to liberation, to nirvana, or to perfect enlightenment. Free yourself from sorrow's mighty stream. So strive in virtue and free yourself from the suffering of samsara. This vessel will be later hard to find. So if we're not diligent now, then this kind of an opportunity that we have will be very difficult to find it, as the teachings on the precious human birth show us in all of the examples and so forth. So contemplate those as a way to realize just how precious your life is, how precious your time is in this life. The time that you have now, you fool, is not for sleep. So Shantideva's referring, he's not calling us fools. I mean, Shantideva, maybe, I don't know, but here is a commentary saying Shantideva's, as he says in the first chapter, he's just saying these things to remind himself about things. So now he's telling himself not to be confused about what there is to do and what there is to avoid. He shouldn't be confused about that. Now is the time for diligently cultivating positive actions, wholesome actions, and avoiding negative, harmful actions. This is the time for that now. So that was the discourse on that's the discourse on the antidote to craving idle pleasures as one form of laziness. And the other two forms will be taken up in the subsequent verses. Okay?